this thing over the X so I know how far I can walk. Otherwise, I walk out of the camera, and the people in tech booth get upset at me. So I have to. All right, you here. Yeah. You're tall, but you still need to come up here. Doing graduate recognition today. We've had a few. We had the first service. We had 3, and it was interesting because all 3 of them, they had been with the church for a significant period of time, but you beat them all. Let me get a microphone for you. There's one. Congratulations, you get a microphone, but you can't hold it very long because I know you, and you might. So give them your name, where you're graduating from, and if you have a clue about your next step, you can tell them that too. If you don't have a clue, say, I got nothing. That's okay. At your age, that's cool.
Okay, my name is Nicole. I'm graduating from Western Harnett High School, and and I'm going to UNC Charlotte, and not 100% sure, but I'll tell you what I tell everyone else. I'm going to major in nursing with a minor in theater.
Oh, very good, thanks. You see, when she got talking, there was potential for that to fall. Now, if you go upstairs in the tent building, there's a display thing over here. If you walk over, there's a picture of the very first service we held in the tent. It was the people who were there, and there was a slightly shorter version of you in that picture, and with her family. So, and her dad, RJ's back there running slides for us today. And the very first guerrilla marketing that we did as a church was RJ and I put up these. They were about this long sign. It's a black sign that just said newchurchon87.com. It's all it said on it. Black sign, white letters. We put them on the road together. He and I. So. This family goes way back with us as far as the church goes. And I have a gift for you. You may already have it. If you don't, congratulations, you now do. Yeah. This is my book, and I actually wrote it for people in your stage of life. That's really what the point was, for people like you to help you guys sort of figure it out, your faith. You can grab it now. Thanks. All right, give me a hand. It's really cool because, like I said, we had 4 people who actually told us they were graduating. Some of you probably didn't tell us. We understand. But everybody who'd been with the church for at least 3 or 4 years. One was a staff's kid. It was cool to see, because we have such a turnover. It's really nice to have been here for some people actually grow up, and so, instead of just having the 6-month thing. If you want to, go ahead and turn in your Bible or turn on your Bible to Jeremiah chapter 5. We're going to be there today, but I want to start with a little story. It's a true story. 2010, there's a guy, make sure I get his name right, Eric Ramsey. Yep, Eric Ramsey. And Eric Ramsey's a missionary, and he gets a team together, and he's going to go work with the Yanzi people in the Congo. So 2010, he flies out of the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he flies in a Cessna for 2.5 hours. And so just picture in your head, you're in the Congo, and you've just flown away from civilization for 2.5 hours. He then gets out, hikes for a good ways with his team to a big river basin, and he gets dugout canoes, and they paddle across. It's a half a mile across this river basin. So they paddle across the river basin in dugout canoes, and then they hike 10 more miles with backpacks to where the people of the Yanzi, who speak the Yanzi language, are in the villages. Now, he has an expectation as he goes out there, because this is way, way out in the bush. Okay, middle of nowhere, take a left. I mean, way out there. Okay, and there have been missionaries in the Congo, of course, for 100 years, more than 100 years, but getting into that obscure of a place is very rare and very difficult to pull off. So his expectation before he leaves is that when he gets to these villages, he might occasionally find a person in one of the villages who's heard the name Jesus. There are villages you can go to in the world where they've never heard the name Jesus. And so he's expecting to find some villages where nobody in the village has ever heard the name Jesus, and he's expecting to find a village or two where there's a person who's heard the name. He's not expecting to find anybody who would be considered remotely a Christian, but he's expecting he might run into a person who's heard the name Jesus. And he comes to the very first village that he gets to after he's been hiking all this way. And he goes into the village, he starts talking, and the next thing you know, he discovers there's a church in this village. Not just any church, a pretty good church. This church actually have a worship team that writes their own songs. and has been doing it for years. They've got a pastor who they've trained as part of a network of churches, and he finds it's a really good little church. Not even little, it's a pretty good church. And he goes to the next village, and the same thing. And he goes to the next village, and the same thing. And he goes to the next village, and the same thing. He goes to 12 villages in this community, in this region, and every one of them has a vibrant, dynamic church that are all connected. And in one of the villages, he finds this thing. It's a 1,000-seat church auditorium. If you want perspective, this is a 700-seat church auditorium. And the reason it looks kind of beat up and run down is not because the church died, it's they outgrew it. And everybody was coming from all the surrounding villages and walking hours to get to church. And they said, you know what would be better if we were to plant a church in each of these communities. So they went out and started planting all these churches. And they have been planting churches in this valley, in this region, for years. And there are these great little churches all over the place. And you're saying, how in the world did that happen? Well, that's what he said. How in the world do we get really good, dynamic, growing churches that are planting they're still in the process. Every time they find a village, they go there and they plant a church in it. They start new churches all over this area. What in the world's going on? And so they start tracking it back, and they're expecting some amazing, this major dude, with the super personality guy, the guy with the you know what they find? They go back 100 years ago and find a pharmacist who came to the area doing medical missions and started doing Bible studies. That's pretty cool. We'll talk more about him at the end. But how do you think he ended up doing cool stuff? There's a couple things. If you're going to do stuff in a community, in a nation, whatever, a couple things have to happen. One is you have to see that there's a need. You have to go, this culture needs a touch from God. This culture is going in a bad direction, something like that. And in this case, it was pretty easy because when they first got there 100 years ago, there were still plenty of cannibals in that area. So generally speaking, cannibals need revival. There's a spiritual need there. And so that's there. And then there has to be somebody who's willing to step up and do something and say something. Now, the question we would then ask is our culture a culture that God needs to work in? Is there a need? And is there somebody who could step up? Now, Jeremiah found himself, we're looking in Jeremiah, he found himself in a similar situation. He was in a culture that was going the wrong direction. And God appointed him to speak into it. And Jeremiah 5, I want us to just go ahead and read what he said, and we'll see if it might just impact and reflect back on us and help us understanding how to live in our culture as well. Jeremiah 5, I'm going to start in verse 20. Make this announcement to Israel and say this to Judah. Listen, you foolish and senseless people, with eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear. Have you no respect for me? Why don't you tremble in my presence? I, the Lord, define the ocean's sandy shoreline as an everlasting boundary that the waters cannot cross. The waves may toss and roar, but they can never pass the boundaries I set. But my people have stubborn and rebellious hearts. They have turned away and abandoned me. They do not say from the heart, let us live in awe of the Lord our God, for he gives us rain each spring and fall, assuring us of a harvest when the time's right. Your wickedness has deprived you of these wonderful blessings. Your sin has robbed you of all these good things. Among my people are wicked men who lie in wait for victims, like a hunter hiding in a blind. They continually set traps to catch people. Like a cage filled with birds, their homes are filled with evil plots, and now they are great and rich. They are fat and sleek. There's no limit to their wicked deeds. They refuse to provide justice to orphans and deny the rights of the poor. Should I not punish them for this, says the Lord? Should I not avenge myself against such a nation? A horrible and shocking thing has happened in this land. The prophets give false prophecies. The priests rule with an iron hand. Worse yet, my people like it that way. But what will you do when the end comes? Jeremiah is living in a country, in a locale, a nation, that has begun to deny God. Not begun to, they've gotten really good at denying God. He's going to spend 40 years talking to these people who are denying God. And we let me tell you how they're denying God, and you can see if it might match up at all with ours. And that is that in Jeremiah's day, they have kind of abandoned the concept of having one God, Yahweh, Jehovah, over all of them, and now everybody gets to just pick what they like. Like some of them, they do like little Jehovah worship there in the middle, little Yahweh, little Lord God. But the Queen of Heaven is a real popular goddess. They like having sacrifices to her. They like to do a sacrifice to Baal once in a while, and that's cool as long as, that's cool for them. They're good with that. And if you don't want to do anything, that's fine. The only thing is you just pick what works for you, and don't try to impose it on anybody else. I mean, it's okay if you want to worship God, but don't be telling me I'm supposed to. Does that make sense? You've never heard that before, have you? And that's what's happening in Jeremiah's day. Jeremiah's day, you get to pick and choose whatever you want to do, whatever God you want to worship, and everybody's okay with it except Jeremiah. See, Jeremiah understands something that we forget. If there is a God, I'll grant you the if part. If there is a God, and if that God has created the universe, and the universe reflects his nature, he has certain rights over that universe to say what is and is not good. Does that not make sense? Let me put it in perspective you can get. Let's say you get to go away for 2 weeks for vacation. You get 2 weeks to travel completely out of town, you disappear, you go away. You, your family, you're gone. The day you leave, there's another family that comes along, and they see your house, and they go, "It's abandoned. We can live here." And they pick the locks and turn off the alarm and move into your house. And when they move in, they say, "Well, this is an abandoned house. There is no owner to this house. Therefore, we can do whatever we want in the house." And they come into your house and they rearrange your furniture and they sell some of your furniture and give some of it away, and they just destroy other parts of your furniture, and they repaint your walls in garish, ugly colors, and they bring their animals in and let their animals do unspeakable things to your living room and rest of your house, and they move things around, and they just make a shambles of your house for 2 weeks. The whole time saying, "Well, there's nobody who owns this house. We can do whatever we want." Now, when you come back, do you have the right to be upset? Yes. Because just because you say nobody owns the house doesn't mean somebody doesn't own the house. And once it is established that somebody owns the house, there are penalties for acting as if there's nobody who owns the house, correct? Now, if there is a God who created the universe and set up guidelines and standards for the universe, who established the way the universe works and all this stuff, even if you deny the fact that he's there and that he's real, if he is there and if he is real, and you choose to live against his standards and mess up his house, he is justified in being upset at you, correct? So the question is not, do I like the idea of God? The question is not, do I like the form of God that is presented in the Bible? The question is not, is everybody allowed to their own opinion? The question is there a God? Has he expressed himself in certain ways and in certain principles that are his? And if he has, to ignore those is to deny him, and there are ramifications for that. And if we are denying God as a society, denying God is both a personal and a societal problem. See, we have this idea that it's a personal issue, and therefore it doesn't reflect on society. But Jeremiah just said, "Should I not punish them for this, says the Lord? Should I not avenge myself against such a nation?" Against such a nation. Amos chapter 1, Amos is one of the minor prophets. He spends the entire first chapter of his book describing all the countries that aren't Israel, that are nearby. He goes one at a time to each one and says, God's going to judge them because they did this, this, and this against God's standards. They don't even own a Bible. And God says, "I'm sorry, you're living against my standards. Here's the penalty." So, I guess the question is, and this is a fair question, is our country, is our culture, are we as people living opposed to God's standards? Well, how about I read you something not from some prophet, but from Paul, the apostle. I'm going to read you some Paul stuff, what he said. Here's something he wrote to Timothy, and he's going to give us a list. And what I want you to do is listen to the list and see if there's anything on the list that describes our culture. You know, as I name something, just in your mind, check yes or no for each thing. With me? Okay. And I'm going to start in chapter 3 of 2 Timothy, verse 2. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Then moving down to verse 7, always learning but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. Okay, were you keeping track in your head? Was there anything you didn't check? Was there anything on the list you went, oh, that doesn't describe us at all? Whew. Maybe. You might have picked one or two. You didn't pick very many, did you? You and everyone going, check, 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 check. In another passage in Galatians, Paul goes through and he gives us a list of what it looks like when people are rejecting God, when you're living apart from God, what it looks like in individuals, and that will reflect back into culture. And then he gives a list of what will happen if you're living toward God's standards, what God's Spirit will do in your life, and then actually in the life of your culture if you're living God's way. And this is in Galatians 5, and listen to see if anything in this list clicks with our culture. It says, Galatians 5:19, when you follow the desires of your sinful nature, the results are very clear. Sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like these. Again, anything you didn't check? Anything you went through the whole list and go, oh yeah, we don't do that. You might, maybe idolatry, you might say, oh, we don't do a lot of idolatry. Whew. Oh yeah, you got 10%. Good job. And then he follows with a list of positive characteristics that are the kind if God is working. If God is working in an individual, and by correlation, if he's working in a culture, this is what it's going to look like. And I want to see how many of these look like our culture. How many of these are the things you go, oh, our culture is definitely... The Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Oh, well, yeah, we are definitely a self-control in the country, aren't we? Gentle? Oh, yeah, we're gentle. Yeah. Okay, we went over on that one, didn't we? See, I think if you look at it, you're going to see very clearly there's something going on in our culture in the fact that if you look at what God said is these are what I'm looking for in people and what I'm not looking for in people, and when your culture bats 1,000 on the stuff you're not supposed to do and bats pretty close to 1,000 on the stuff you're supposed to do as getting them all wrong, there could be a problem, right? Matter of fact, if I go back into the Jeremiah passage, which we just read, and I see 4 things about denying God that come out of there about cultures and as individuals. One of the things that's evidence if you're denying God is, one of them is that you'll ignore God's control over the universe. Verse 22 said, I, the Lord, define the ocean's sandy shoreline as an everlasting boundary that the waters cannot cross. The waves may toss and roar, but they can never pass the boundaries I set. But my people have stubborn and rebellious hearts. They have turned away and abandoned me. And he says it's kind of, it's pretty cool. He says, I've set up boundaries for the ocean and said, ocean, you can't come this far. I've separated the land from the water, and the water, you're not allowed over here. And I'm going to set up a barrier to stop you, water. And it's going to be made of, did you hear what it said? Sand. Okay. When I'm building a barrier against water, I don't use sand, right? I don't know if you guys got this problem. We live in the sand hills, which means we're covered in sand. Anybody have any trouble with erosion? Right? I've got, the big pipe under my driveway that's supposed to carry the community's water out away, and I'm just constantly fighting my driveway wanting to go on down because it's all covered in sand and it just wants to run away because sand's a lousy boundary for water. And God says, just to let you know, I think it's one of his little sense of humor things. He says, I'm going to set up and I'm going to make the oceans never come across a line, and the line's going to be made of sand. And the ocean's never going to violate it. Wow. Because, again, I'd use concrete. But what he says is this. He says, I set up a line for the ocean, and the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean will not violate my line. But I set up a moral line, and I said humans don't violate the moral line, and the Pacific Ocean will not violate my line. But you wander across it all the time with impunity. You act like my moral line is no big deal. The ocean listens, you won't. That's the point. We don't recognize God's control. But just as bad, maybe worse, we also ignore God's blessing. They do not say from the heart, let us live in awe of the Lord our God, for he gives us rain each spring and fall, assuring of us a harvest when the time is right. Not only do we deny that God's in control, we deny that God's in charge of the good stuff. God set up our universe pretty cool. I can go, I get oxygen every time, which is good. Because if it was all nitrogen, I would die. And if it was all helium, I'd speak like Mickey Mouse. Right? It works. Matter of fact, physicists have shown that the universe is so insanely fine-tuned that there are these certain numbers that define like the gravitational constant, which is how much power gravity exerts. And if it was just a slight bit more, the entire universe would collapse in on itself and could never have developed. And if it was a slight bit less, the universe would just scatter and never be able to form planets. And there's case after case after case where our planet is just exactly the right distance from the sun. If it was any closer, we'd burn up. If it was any farther away, we'd freeze to death. And the universe is insanely fine-tuned because of God's control and his blessing on us. And you say, yeah, Steve, I understand you're saying that, but some people deny that. Well, they're wrong. Here's what the Bible says. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. God has communicated his standards. God has communicated his nature and his blessing to people. We just choose to ignore it. You say, I don't know if that's true. Well, let me ask you a question. How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you think we should change the moral structure that people in general have and make it okay to beat up little old ladies? I mean, right now it's generally frowned on, right? Generally speaking, it's frowned on to beat up little old ladies. If you go around punching little old ladies, you get in trouble from everybody, right? Anybody in the room think that we should switch that and make it to where it's good to beat up little old ladies? Anybody? Anybody? Now, if I were to go outside of the room, if I were to go down in Fayetteville, go downtown and interview people, how many of them would vote, yeah, we should change that rule? If I go to any city in America and say, should we change the rule about beating up old ladies? What kind of support would I get on that petition? Serious, real live, honest to goodness, we should make it none. What if I were to say, why don't we change the rule about not being able to abuse children? What kind of support would I get? Even the people who abuse children would say it's wrong. Right? And you can go all over the world, and of all the things you can make moral rules about, we agree on we spend all our time arguing about the 3 to 5% over here of things we disagree about, but if you look at it, there's this huge 95% pile that everybody agrees on. You're not allowed to punch me in the face and steal my stuff. Right? Because that's wrong. And everybody agrees on it. And God's planted that in our hearts so that we understand the basic moral law, so that when we violate it, we know we're violating God. And so God has set it up so that there is a God. We know he's a God. We know he's in control. We know he's doing things. We may choose to deny it, but we still deep down know it. Even the biggest atheist at some point in his heart has rejected God. Matter of fact, every time I've run into an atheist, I've yet to find a real atheist who rejected God because of the logic. It's always emotional. They just don't want somebody in control. You're not the boss of me now. It's all about control. And so a culture that denies God's control and denies God's blessings. Another thing I see in the Jeremiah thing is that it's a culture that oppresses the weak. Verse 28 said, they are fat and sleek, and there is no limit to their wicked deeds. They refuse to provide justice to orphans and deny the rights of the poor. God practices what I call trickle-up morality and justice. His basic concept is, if the poor and the weak are getting justice and they're getting taken care of, it only goes to reason, so is everybody else. Because justice always starts with the powerful. The powerful can always get their justice. It's the weak who can't. If the weak are getting justice, the powerful no doubt are. So God he doesn't check the whole society. He just checks the bottom line. He just checks the weak. And if your culture is denying justice to the weak, it's an unjust culture. Not that our culture has any trouble with that. There's a verse in Isaiah which I probably should have read because I like it a lot. It's describing all the ways that the culture can get in trouble, and one of them is you acquit the guilty for a bribe. But we're smart. We found a loophole for that one. We don't acquit the guilty for a bribe. We don't let them off scot-free if they're powerful enough to pay a bribe. What we do is we make them powerful enough to buy a good lawyer. And if you can't get a good lawyer, you have a different set of justice, and you're liable to spend time in jail for absolutely nothing. There was just very recently, there were these two women who were traveling from Arizona, I believe it was, to Texas. And as they were traveling through, they drove through, went to a convenience store and got gas. And later, after they drove off, the owner of the convenience store accused them of stealing 2 hot dogs. Now, the video shows they didn't do it, but they were accused of it. And the owner of the convenience store filed the complaint with the county. They sent a subpoena to the two. They had to come back. They drove all the way from Texas back to Arizona. From Arizona back to Texas, where they were arrested and thrown in jail. Now, they didn't bring enough money for bail. Nobody around the jail was willing to give loan bail, to somebody from out of town who didn't have a great deposit. They spent weeks in jail for not stealing 2 hot dogs. Until the communities where they came from realized it was happening, raised enough money and sent it up there, because they were 2 upstanding women who were they just didn't have any money. And there are people in jail right now all over this country. The only reason they're in jail is they don't have any way to raise the bail to get out before their trial. And they're losing their jobs and they're not getting, it's suppressing the poor. It's taking advantage of the weak, because if you've got enough money, you're out now. You're good. And then the lawyer will find enough loopholes to get you out of it anyway. See, God doesn't like that. Because he looks at a culture and he checks the bottom line. How are they treating the poor and the powerless? And if you're treating them badly, that means it's an unjust culture, and God doesn't like that. And you're in line for his judgment. That make sense? I didn't say he liked it. Does that make sense? Okay? And then the last piece of it that I see from the passage. It says, among my people are wicked men who lie in wait for victims like a hunter hiding in a blind. They continually set traps to catch people. It's an aggressive selfishness, not just selfishness, an aggressive selfishness. The picture there is of a trap. What they would do is they would set this bird trap, and they'd take a little cage and they put some tame birds, some domesticated birds, in the cage and set the cage in the middle of the trap. And the wild birds would look and they'd see, oh, it must be safe. There are birds down there. And the other birds would fly in to eat the food that was there, and then the trap would shut and catch them all. And they're saying that's how people are aggressively taking stuff from other people. Isaiah 5, verse 8. What sorrow for you who buy up house after house, field after field, until everyone is evicted and you live alone in the land. We don't even look at that as being a big deal. And I'm not saying this to condemn the person. It's just part of our society. We do this all the time. It's not even considered that big of a deal. Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Facebook, created Facebook. I'm pretty sure he lives in a neighborhood that's different than mine. I'm betting the houses are slightly more valuable than mine. Just guessing. He went out recently and bought every house around his and tore them down so he could have more space. Now, I'm not condemning him. That's just what we do as a society. If somebody has something you need, you take it. Well, at least he paid for them. Buys up houses, just like Isaiah said. Buy up house after house and field after field until everyone is evicted and you live alone in the land. Is it safe to say we live in a nation that is denying God and is showing the evidence of denying God? Now, your question, your natural response is, so what? What's the big deal? There are cultures that deny God all over the place. Well, denying God costs us his protection and his blessings. Denying God costs us his protection and his blessings. We've talked about this a lot. Anytime you stay under God's standards and you live within God's boundaries, God blesses you and protects you for it. And anytime you step out, God doesn't. That's what it said. This verse is so powerful. Verse 25, it said, your wickedness has deprived you of these wonderful blessings. Your sin has robbed you of these good things. And I look around and go, we have been such a blessed nation, and right now it doesn't seem we're being blessed as much. Is that just my opinion? And I wonder why that is. It's funny, we sing God Bless America, but we don't believe in God, and we deny his power and authority, and are surprised that he doesn't bless us. Ouch. Proverbs 14:34. One of everybody's least favorite verses. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin condemns any people. God likes for nations to live according to his standards. And it says there, where it says condemns, the word is a disgrace. And it's only used one other time in the Bible, that word for disgrace. And it describes somebody who's committing incest. Disgrace. God looks at a nation with disgrace. And he looks at us when we choose leaders who don't live within his standards. He looks at us when we make decisions that are selfishly benefit us and hurt others as not being in his standards. When we forsake the poor. Here's the thing. If you want to, you can speak up for this stuff and stay popular if you want to. There's a way to do this. You can speak against the stuff that's going on in our culture, and you can do it in a way that makes you fans and makes you more popular. You can do it. Here's how you do it. Here's the secret. Pick one type of sin and only attack it. Preferably a sin that you either A, don't have a problem with, or B, that you tolerate very well. Because honestly, we all have sins that offend us more than others, right? Matter of fact, in all the cultural debates, you got your favorites that you're all excited about this one and just fine about that one. So just pick a group. Pick one. Doesn't matter which one. Pick one. Speak heartily against that sin. And all the people who hate that sin, they'll come to your side. And then you don't even say anything about the other ones. And you ignore all those so that you got no popular following here, because you only attack sins that people don't have any problem with, that they don't have an issue with. They don't challenge them at all. And you ignore the other ones. And you end up with a really rabid following because you're building hate toward a certain group of people, and people love to hate. You want to be unpopular? Pick on all of them. Oh. Talk about how terrible it is to commit moral sin and how terrible it is to afflict the poor and the minorities and the immigrants. Speak out against the fact that all the wealth goes to this really small percentage and more people are becoming poor. Speak against that, and you'll make one group happy and one group mad. So just pick one side, only choose that one. But if you want to get everybody upset, pick them all. Cover the whole field. I guarantee that we have a very diverse church, and I'm very pleased with that. We work on it very hard to make it a very diverse church. And I can speak about certain groups of sins, and people will attack me for speaking against sin because it's one of theirs. And then I'll switch and speak against a different set of sins, and now they'll send me a letter saying, oh, now you're preaching right. Now you're getting it. No, I just got off your case and got on somebody else's. But righteousness exalts a nation. So righteousness builds it up only if you don't pick and choose sins, if you choose them all. See, the thing is, and the reason to do this is because it matters. It's real. That was how the whole passage, Jeremiah's passage, this is what drew me to that passage to start with, was that very last line. In verse 31 says, but what will you do when the end comes? Hebrews 9:27 says, just as it appointed a man to die once, and after that comes judgment. Two truths. We're all going to die. We're all going to stand before God. And we can deny that and pretend it's not real, but it's true. And it's true in two ways. It is true about you. You're going to die. You're going to stand before God. And it's true about everybody that you know. They're going to die and they're going to stand before God. Now, when you stand before God, there's a couple different paths. First question that God asks is, what did you do with my son? I sent my son Jesus. He lived a perfect life. He died on a cross and took all of your sins. Did you accept that gift of salvation so you could have a relationship with me? Yes, no. That's one of God's few true-false questions. Okay? If the answer is false, that's a bad thing. But if the answer is true, he takes us to one of his parables. He tells it a few times, different ways. It's a parable where the owner, the guy who represents God in the parable, comes to three people and he hands them stuff. And he goes to the first person, he hands them a whole bunch of stuff. He hands them, could be money, resources, talent, time. It's really vague, so you can plug in whatever. And he hands them all kinds of stuff, and they take the stuff that God gives them, and they go out and they make things happen. They use their talent, they use their time, they use their resources to advance the kingdom, to do good things. And God comes back and says, what did you do with my stuff? And the guy says, here's what I did. And the guy goes, bingo, good job, here's some more. Second guy didn't get quite as much, but he still took it out and just used it like crazy for God's good. And God goes, yeah, good job, here's more stuff. And there's a third guy. Didn't have as much as the others, but he still had plenty. He said, this is a bad culture. I didn't want to lose anything. So I just stuck it under a rock. And God says, wrong answer. And God has to each of us given gifts, talents, abilities, passions, resources, money, time. And after he checks to see if you've decided to follow Christ, he already knows that. Once that decision is made, the next question is, what did you do with my stuff? What did you do with what I gave you? How did you impact your culture, your society, your neighborhood, your family, your friends with what I gave you? Which brings us to my last of my points. Because it's important that you get this, because we can mess it up if we're not careful. See, a lot of times we have this idea that our job is to win, because we're very pragmatic. But here, understand this. This is changing how I think about so many things, now that this reality is kind of sinking in my head. As followers of Christ, we're not called to win, we're called to stand. The guy who wrote this, Jeremiah, He's in ministry for 40 years, give or take. Started as a young adult, maybe teenager, spent his entire life doing that, talking to the people, telling them what God wanted in their standards, how they should be living as the people of God, and they ignored him for pretty much the whole time. And the only time they didn't ignore him is because they were ticked at him and either throwing him in jail or throwing him in a cistern or putting him in stocks and sticking him or beating him. They were abusing him. And in the end, the nation fell. And he got kidnapped and taken out of the country and had to die and died in a foreign land. But he did what God called him to do, because we're not called to win, we're called to stand. And I'm afraid, and this is, like I said, this is messing my brain up. As Christians, as the church, we've been in a position where we thought for a long time we had the chance to win, that we had control. That if we did things right and we played the politics right and we did all the things right, that we could win. It's never been our job to win. Because a lot of times winning gets you dirty. Who are you willing to get in bed with to win? Whose slime are you willing to get all over you so you can win? The reality is we're not called to win, we're called to stand. We're called to say these are God's principles. This is what God holds to. If you want to support God's principles, I can support you. If you're not going to support God's principles, I can't support you. And it doesn't matter whether we, quote, win or lose, because God's in control of the whole thing. God's the one who chooses winners and losers, not me. God gets to be in charge of all that stuff. That's his job, not mine. And our job is to stand, to speak the truth, to speak it in love, to speak it in whatever platform we have. Not to be obnoxious. There are plenty of people doing the obnoxious thing. That job role, that job description's full. We don't need more obnoxious people. We definitely don't need more obnoxious Christians. But we need people that are willing to stand with grace and love and mercy and truth and proclaim the truth to the people they do have contact with. Whatever your podium is, I have the chance to stand in front of hundreds of people and speak. Some of you get a chance to talk to one or two, and you stand in wherever God puts you and you speak the truth. And not getting beat down and thinking, oh my goodness, we're all going to lose the culture. We might. It's not my call. My job's not to win, my job's to stand. John Piper says, if we give most of our time to bemoaning and criticizing the world for acting like the world, our vision of God and his glorious future for his people will become smaller and smaller. Because we're trying to win, and we want to win little battles. And so, yeehaw, we won, and we won this big. And God's glorious future is not about us winning little tiny battles. Because our vision is for God and his glorious future and what he can pull off. And if we lose sight of that, Piper says, that could be a greater tragedy than the one we're living in right now. Because we're called to stand. Now, if you're going to stand, the first step is to know what you're standing for. And you're starting out with that relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you don't have that relationship with Christ, then all the rest of this stuff's not really that helpful. And if you're ready for that relationship with Christ, we make it really simple, because God made it really simple. You grab a blue bag. We got some there and there and there and there. If you grab a bag, somebody will come up to you who's trained. It'll take about 7 minutes. They'll unpack the bag with you and show you how to have that relationship with Christ. It's interesting. We're called to stand and proclaim. And the first thing God asks us to do after we become a follower of Christ is to proclaim it. We do that by baptism. If you've never been baptized, we do that the first Wednesday of every month. Just let us know. We'll be glad to sign you up for the next one so you can announce to the world, I'm a Christ follower. I'm standing. I'm standing. It may be as I've spoken, God's elbowed you about something. You want to pray about it? We've got a cross over there. It's just for you to go pray. That's what it's for. It could be about anything. So if you want to pray, you can do it during the next song. If you want to pray with somebody, there's a couple people over there who'd be glad to pray with you. You may want to take communion to sort of remind yourself of how God stood for you so that you can stand for him. We've got a communion station back there, one up here. Oh, I didn't finish the story. You probably want me to finish the story. Because I was telling you about this area where there were all these little churches. And you probably want to know about this amazing guy who planted all those churches. Well, I always forget his name. His name was Dr. William Leslie. He was a pharmacist. He went to the Congo to be a medical missionary. In midlife, he was not young when he went. He was there for 12 years. And as he was there, he noticed as he was helping the people with medical needs that they had a need for a relationship with Christ. So he'd row across the river into the area where the villages were, and he'd go over and he would just have little Bible studies. That's all he did. He would just talk to them about Jesus and teach them how to read the Bible, how to pray, that kind of thing. He did that for a few years. This is the cool part. When he came home, after 12 years, he was convinced he'd failed. Because he hadn't planted any churches, he hadn't led any major revivals, nothing really big had happened. He just held a few small Bible studies. When he died 9 years later, he was still convinced he'd been a total failure as a missionary. Now, I like to make up heaven, because I don't know how God actually does things, but I like to pretend and sort of make up my own stories. Do you ever do that, where you make up your own heaven stories? I like to do that. And what I like to do is, here comes Dr. Leslie. He's coming into heaven. He says, sorry. I know I let you down, God. You wanted me to do big things, and I just led a couple Bible studies in the Congo. Sorry. God just lets him walk away. A little bit later, God goes, hey, Dr. Leslie, come here. Look, see that little church there? Yeah. It's one of yours. What? Walks away just a little bit taller. A little bit later, Dr. Leslie, come here. See that church there? That's one of yours too. Dr. Leslie, see that big 1,000-seat auditorium? That's yours. That's what you started. Dr. Leslie, see all the other churches that are going all, yeah, they're yours. And then one day Peter yells out, Dr. Leslie, come here. I got some people I want you to meet. I got some people that are here in heaven with us because you stood. Oh, Dr. Leslie, I got some more. Dr. Leslie, I want you to meet some of your spiritual grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and your great-great-grandchildren because you stood. And what God did through him, God can do through you. You may never go to the Congo, but you can go to your neighborhood, you can go to your workplace, and you can go to your gym, and you can go to your parent-teacher meetings at school, and you can go where you are, and you can go to your family, and you can stand. You can stand with love and grace and mercy and truth. And you can present what God's done for you, and you can say what you can say as you stand, and you can do what he did. Because when we decide it's not about winning, it's about standing, that frees God up. And when we free God up, he always wins.